Hey Klutz, I need to talk to you. It was John Campbell, the gang member in the indoor exercise cage. Klutz turned and walked to the rear of the tier. Without knowing it, he had just completed step 4 of Silverstein's plan. Klutz had been drawn away from the other two guards and was now standing at the end of the tier, as far as possible from the exit and steel gate that separated the tier from the guard's office. As officers McClellan and Mayhem escorted Silverstein back to his cell, he stopped to chat with Randy Gomez, another gang member. Allowing Silverstein to stop at Gomez's cell was against Bureau regulations, but these encounters had become common practice in the control unit because guards were afraid to tell the inmates that they couldn't stop to visit. In a flash, Gomez reached through the bars and used the key to unlock Silverstein's handcuffs. Then he lifted his shirt, and Silverstein grabbed a shank tucked inside the waistband of Gomez's pants. Step 5. Look out, he's got a knife, McClellan yelled as Silverstein spun around. This is between me and Klutz, Silverstein screamed and shot past the two guards. Klutz saw me coming and he froze for a second, Silverstein said. He knew I had him cornered. Klutz raised his arms to protect himself, but Silverstein's knife jammed deep in his belly. I just went off, Silverstein later recalled. I just started stabbing him over and over and over again. Klutz tried to hit me, but I didn't even feel it. I'm not hearing nothing. I'm not feeling nothing. I don't know what is going on around me. All I know is I got a knife and I'm jamming. All I see is his hands moving and me stabbing him, and everything else is blank. Despite his wounds, Klutz managed to push Silverstein to one side during the attack and struggled down the tier. Officer McClellan hurried forward, grabbed him, and helped him toward the steel gate at the front of the tier where they would be safe. Just as they were about to go through it, Silverstein caught up with them, grabbed Klutz's shoulder, jerked him down onto the floor, and began punching him again with the knife. Officer Mayhem was standing on the other side of the gate, reached through the bars and smashed a nightstick against Silverstein's head. Silverstein staggered back, and McClellan and Mayhem pulled Klutz off the tier and slammed the steel gate shut. Klutz's chest was covered with blood. He had been stabbed 40 times. This ain't against cops, Silverstein yelled, with the knife still in his hand. Drop the shank, ordered a lieutenant who had just arrived at the cell block. Silverstein refused. I honestly believed that they were going to kill me, and I was not going to give up without a fight. For several minutes, the lieutenant talked to Silverstein, finally convincing him to put the shank down and lock himself in his cell. I felt a huge weight had been lifted off me, said Silverstein. I was so happy Klutz was finally dead. Unpardonable through the killing of a guard was, at this point, Klutz's murder remained an isolated incident, but that quickly changed. Prison officials decided against sweeping the entire control unit for weapons. Instead, they moved Silverstein into an isolation cell and decided to continue operating the control unit as usual. 8 hours later, officers Robert L. Hoffman Sr., Jerry L. Powles, and Robert D. Ditterling were taking Silverstein's friend, Clayton Fountain, back to his cell from the recreation cage when Fountain stopped to talk to another inmate who repeated the earlier process by unlocking Fountain's handcuffs and giving him a shank. Fountain spun around and yelled, "You motherfuckers want a piece of this? Come on." He then attacked all three guards, stabbing Ditterling first. Powles was second in line. Fountain knocked him to the floor. In a courageous act, Hoffman helped Ditterling off the tier and then went back inside, unarmed, to rescue Powles. Hoffman grabbed his fellow officer and began pulling him to safety as Fountain continued to stab both of them. As soon as the two guards were on the other side of the steel gate, out of Fountain's reach, Hoffman collapsed. He died a few minutes later in the arms of his son, who was also a guard at the prison. Because of Hoffman's valor, Ditterling and Powles both survived. Fountain, meanwhile, danced up and down the tier. He later was overheard telling other inmates that he wasn't going to let Silverstein get ahead when it came to dead bodies. Never in the history of the Bureau had two guards been slain on the same day in the same prison. Director Carlson was outraged. The murder of an officer can never be justified, he recalled. Even if Klutz was harassing Silverstein, and I don't believe that he was, and there was never any proof that he was, that still didn't give Silverstein the right to murder him. Even though the murders had taken place in the control unit, Warden Miller ordered inmates throughout the prison locked in their cells until further notice. Then 2 days later, he lifted the order. He still believed that Marion could be operated as an open institution. Within a few days, an inmate was murdered, this time in the general prison population, and 4 inmates attacked a group of guards. Miller declared a state of emergency. Every prisoner was locked in his cell, and Leavenworth's SWORD team was sent to Marion to help restore order. John Greshner, Ronnie Brusino, and other inmates at Marion would later claim in a class action lawsuit filed against the Bureau that Marion's guards and the SWORD team from the hot house beat and tortured them in retaliation for the murders of Klutz and Hoffman. After listening to testimony from 90 witnesses and reviewing 150 pieces of evidence during 28 days of trial, a federal magistrate would later conclude that there was no credible evidence to prove inmates had been abused. This is not to say that there may have been isolated incidents of excessive force, Magistrate Kenneth J. Mayers wrote, but given the circumstances at Marion after the murders, an extra push or shove would be understandable. He noted that guards were being attacked, doused with feces and urine. Fires were being set by inmates, cells were being destroyed, and officers were being told that they would be killed. The magistrate also specifically criticized Greshner and Brusino, whom he described as not credible witnesses. He wrote, "This litigation was conceived by a small group of hardcore inmates who are bent on the disruption of the prison system." Carlson decided that Marion would remain permanently locked down after the guards and SWORD teams restored order. He was not going to let the prison slip out of control again. Inmates remained confined to their cells 23 hours per day. Fountain was sent to a prison in Springfield, Missouri. Silverstein went to Atlanta. Both were put under no human contact. 5 years after the murder, as he sat in the basement of the hot house, recalling how he had stabbed Klutz, Silverstein said that he still thinks about the guard every day. "Even when I dream, Klutz is there. I thought killing him would put an end to it," Silverstein explained, "but it hasn't. He still haunts me. I think about him a lot, and I hate him because of what he made me do. He is responsible for me being locked like a wild animal in this cage. He made me give up my life. I didn't know until after I killed him that there are 1,000 Klutzes out there, and all of them have a stick, and all of them want to poke at me." Silverstein refused to sleep on a mattress at Leavenworth. He said, because it had been his anger over the mattress that Klutz took him from Marion, and that it had finally driven him to kill the guard. Upstairs in the warden's office at the hot house, a few hours after I finished talking to Silverstein, I watched as Robert Matthews pulled his notepad from his coat pocket during his regular 4 p.m. meeting with his executive staff and told them that Silverstein's mail was being poorly copied. "He is the only special inmate we have here, and I don't want him sending copies of his letters to some judge or court and getting us in trouble," Matthews said. "Regardless of what he has done, we must accommodate him." The next day, Silverstein's mail arrived on time, and he was able to read each photocopy.